Thad Gray wants to be Connecticut's fiscal conscience, but that means he'll need to win in his run for treasurer in November. Today on The Morning Record, Gray joins us to make his case. He talks about his plans for managing the state's investments and his views on how much bonding the state should take on. He also explains why he feels his resume is better than his opponent, Sean Wooden. Today is October 16th. I'm Mike Savino, and this is The Morning Record. So we are now joined by Thad Gray. He is the Republican candidate for state treasurer in November's election. Thad, thanks for joining me.
It's great to be on the line with you, Mike. Thanks a lot.
So the way I've started out these interviews is first I give the candidates a chance to make some opening remarks. So, go ahead and tell everybody why you should be the next treasurer for the state of Connecticut.
Thank you very much, Mike. So I believe that my candidacy offers something different. I'm doing this as a call to service on behalf of the state that I grew up in and love. And what I've found is that everywhere I've been across the four corners of our state in the last year, I've heard the same 5 words from voters, and those 5 words are, if we don't fix Connecticut problems, we are out of here. So that has convinced me even more decidedly that it is absolutely time to get serious about Connecticut's problems. We need serious people to make tough decisions. I firmly believe that there is no single solution or magic bullet to Connecticut's problems, nor is there a single individual that can solve our problems. We need to do it as part of a team, and based on my 35 years of relevant financial experience, I strongly believe that I am the right person to be on the team to begin to move the state back in the right direction, particularly with respect to 3 things that I want to prioritize as treasurer. And those 3 things are improving the returns on our pension assets, stopping the deterioration of our bond rating, and acting as Connecticut's fiscal conscience in the office of treasurer. And let me expand a little bit on all 3 of those points. So with respect to the pension returns, as you and listeners are probably aware, we have about $34 billion of pension assets that protect the retirement security of approximately 200,000 teachers, public safety workers, and other public employees across the state. And regardless of whether you're a pension beneficiary or not, the returns on our assets are those pension assets are critical to everyone in the state, everyone who's a taxpayer, because everything is sort of interrelated. If the pension returns lag, it impacts the taxpayers. And it adds to our unfunded liability, so it even impacts the bond rating of the state. And when we have a bond rating in our state that's sliding, that means that every time the state issues more debt, it costs taxpayers more money, and that money has to come from somewhere, so it comes from our budget, which means that it cannibalizes services that everybody counts on every day for the quality of life in the state. It could be public safety, it could be education, it could be healthcare. The money comes out of those programs to pay bondholders, and that's a waste of the taxpayers' money. So my priorities are those 3 things: to improve the pension returns, to stop the slide in our bond rating, and to be the fiscal conscience of the state. In order to improve the pension returns, we need professional management in the office. I have done this for 35 years. I have a professional experience in selecting investment managers. We need to look at our state has about 160 investment managers managing the pension assets. We need to take a look at every one of those managers, start all over again with respect to policies, procedures, and planning. Ask 3 questions. Why were those managers hired? How have their returns performed with respect to the expectations we had from them at the outset, and the benchmarks that we set forth that they're compared with against other managers? And third, what are the fees that they've charged our state? And if they fail on any one of those grades, we need to replace those managers and bring in new managers. With respect,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, with respect to the bond rating, it's important to remember that the treasurer sits on over 20 different boards and commissions across the state. Probably the two most important are the State Bond Commission and the Municipal Accountability Review Board. And we need to have a treasurer who will act as the fiscal conscience of our state in those various positions. Unfortunately, that is not what we've seen for the last 20 years under the current treasurer. We've seen someone who's been really a rubber stamp for the Democratic Party. And I will tell you and listeners that regardless of who is in the governor's office, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat starting next year, I will stand up and protect the interests of the taxpayers in every one of the positions that I fill across the 20 different commissions and boards where the treasurer sits, to have the backs of the taxpayers and the pensioners every single day. Sorry, it sounded like you were coming in with a question.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I'm sorry to cut you off. I certainly want to give you the opportunity to say, whatever the points you want to make. I did also, want to, you touched on your 35 years experience in the private sector. So I apologize if this becomes a little redundant, but, you're somebody who in this area, maybe not a lot of people are familiar with you, especially if they weren't involved in the Republican convention process, weren't paying attention during the primary stage, and now are just starting to get to know you for the first time. So talk to me a little bit more about your experience and why you think, on top of having the ideals, why you think your experience is something that should attract voters.
Yeah, I think in a nutshell, it should attract voters because it's absolutely directly relevant to what the state treasurer does day in and day out in their job in Hartford. So for the last, I spent 28 years at an investment management firm where we were making investments on behalf of pension funds across the United States, and our investments protected the retirement security of approximately 2 million pensioners across the United States, and in fact some overseas as well. And for the last 10 years of my career, I was the chief investment officer of the firm, so I led the investment team making these decisions on a daily basis on behalf of our clients. We had excellent returns for our clients, which is why we kept our clients for long periods of time. And I think the other thing that I'm proudest of, and this is a very important point, the job requires integrity. It requires not just experience, but it requires integrity. And the firm that I worked for in its entire history and operation had a completely pristine track record, never had a single complaint from a regulator or a client. And there are just not very many financial firms out there that you can say that about. So in a nutshell, the reason that voters should be behind me in this election is that I have the right experience for the job, relevant experience for the job, competence to do the job, and integrity that's needed in this office where billions of dollars of assets are at stake. There are literally 43 billion reasons to vote for the right treasurer in November, and I'm the right treasurer for all those reasons.
You certainly brought up the role that the treasurer plays on the bond commission and wanting to serve as sort of a fiscal conscience for the state. Can you elaborate on that a little bit and sort of give us some insight into your thinking in terms of some of the projects that you would support, some of the projects that maybe you don't like that the state is bonded for?
Absolutely, and if you've looked at my website, Mike, you've probably seen that I've been quite vocal about this throughout the campaign. I'm a firm believer that bonding should be used to pay for long-term capital projects. So examples of that would be building and rebuilding schools, building and rebuilding roads, bridges, and other facilities in such as hospitals that are important for the healthcare infrastructure of our state. What we should not be bonding for is to borrow for operating expenses or for projects that really should be funded and prioritized at the local level. So an example of how we bonded for operating expenses is through the use of something called bond premiums, where the premium is basically taken and used in the general fund for just to pay the bills of the state. That's the wrong way to be bonding. And there are some other projects that were bonded for recently by the Bond Commission that I really think should have been funded and prioritized at the local level. So again, long-term capital projects is what we should be bonding for: roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, those kinds of things.
You mentioned the fact that the treasurer sits on 20 different boards, and certainly you've made it clear that in your view the Bond Commission is the most important one. What are some of the other ones that you might see as important, or that you'd be interested and excited to be a part of?
There's one that I'm actually already a part of, which is the Retirement Security Authority, which I was appointed to that by House Minority Leader Themis Claridis last year. I think another example of an important board commission is the Municipal Accountability Review Board, which, as you're aware, was set up after the Hartford bailout to provide oversight over municipalities that are in financial trouble. The two that are under the closest oversight at the moment by the MARB are Hartford and West Haven. And that commission makes a very, very important decision as to whether the municipalities under review go into a tier, which is called Tier 4, where essentially the MARB steps in and takes over the financial management of those municipalities. So that's very, very important for providing cities like Hartford and West Haven with the tools that they need to reform their budgets without the state having to come in and bail them out every time, which is what happened with Hartford. It's very, very important to remember when we talk about these various boards and commissions across our state that all of the financial transactions that we enter into as a state are interrelated. And with respect to the Bond Commission, the decades of bonding that we have undertaken have negatively impacted our credit rating. And in fact, our credit rating now is the third lowest in the United States. Only New Jersey and Illinois are lower. So it's incredibly important that we have someone on every one of those boards and commissions that will be looking out for the interests of the taxpayers, act as the state's fiscal conscience, and protect the backs of the pensioners as well.
Your opponent, Sean Wooden, has made one of the key parts of his campaign is to look at socially responsible investing, and I know at least early on you kind of, if I'm not mistaken, you had indicated that you don't necessarily agree with that. So he obviously promotes it as sort of it's an opportunity to get returns while also promoting certain outcomes. Do you still disagree with this strategy? And if so, why?
Well, what I would say, Mike, is that I favor socially responsible investing where it does not have a negative impact on the rates of returns of our pension assets. In fact, when I was in my prior job, our firm was a signatory to the UN Principles of Socially Responsible Investing, and I supported that decision, and I'm in favor of those principles. But what I won't do is I won't play politics with teachers and other public employees' money. That is what I'm fearful of when I hear a candidate prioritize socially responsible investing over the priority of generating high rates of return for our teachers and pensioners. We have to remember that the money that's been put aside for our pension assets was funded by the employees, funded by the taxpayers, and the employees the teachers and public safety workers and other employees across the state, they rely on that money for their retirement. So what I'm trying to say simply is we cannot afford to play politics with those assets. And when I hear candidates talk about socially responsible investing as their top priority, the concern I have is that they are, in fact, using the office of treasurer as a platform for political purposes and other social objectives. I'm fully in favor of socially responsible investing, but I will not play politics with the pensioners' money, and I will put the priority on increasing the rates of return of those assets, because thousands, hundreds of thousands of people rely on those assets for their retirement.
You've certainly been critical of your opponent when it comes to Hartford's finances and his stance on the I know you criticize him for his response to the bailout of Hartford, even though it happened, the bailout came after his time on the council, and also in general, certainly, Sean and Hartford have taken criticism for the funding of the Dunkin' Donuts park. Sean has defended those. First off, with Hartford's finances, obviously it was a mess before he got on the council. It's not as if he had inherited a booming city and then saw it go bankrupt. And also with the Dunkin' Donuts park, he points out rightfully that attendance is good, that it's a well reviewed park, and that he's confident that it will help to encourage investment around that park. So I just wanted to ask you, why do you think that those are things that voters should consider and perhaps be critical of when going to the voting booth?
Certainly. I'm simply going to give you and listeners the facts, the simple facts. From 2012 to 2016, Sean Wooden was president of the Hartford City Council. During that period of time, Hartford's bond rating, which started as investment grade in 2012 when he assumed office, was downgraded 11 times. And at the time he left office, the bond rating was 7 notches below junk. Within 10 months of his departure from the city council, the mayor was discussing the possibility of Chapter 9 receivership for the city, and the legislature stepped in with $80 million of assistance over a 2-year period of time. And then in the spring of this year, 2018, as we all know, the $80 million of assistance turned into a $550 million bailout. So actually, if you go way back into history, Hartford actually was a thriving city. Clearly, it's been a poor city for decades. But there are a number of other poor cities around the state that haven't been at the verge of bankruptcy lately. Hartford slid catastrophically towards bankruptcy under Sean Wooden's leadership over the Hartford City Council. With respect to Yard Goats Park, listen, everyone likes baseball on a summer night, and it is a beautiful stadium, and it is generating very, very strong attendance. But the reality is Hartford could not afford that stadium. That stadium is the most expensive minor league park in the United States, to the best of my knowledge. And any municipal leader that you talk to who knows what they're talking about and knows their job well will tell you that minor league baseball parks are a financial disaster. If Hartford had been in great financial shape, maybe a project like that would have been affordable. But this project was approved at a time when Hartford's credit rating was on a negative slide, where the city was definitely not doing well. And I would maintain that it's just not something Hartford can afford. In fact, Hartford had to step in with $5.5 million in the form of a bailout for the cost overruns back in 2016, at a time when the budget was under a lot of stress. And going forward, the city is going to be funding about $3.5 million of operating losses year in and year out, as far as the eye can see. So I think that if you look at the numbers, it's very hard to conclude other than the fact that this has been a financial failure for the city. And a number, it's not just Republicans saying this, quite a number of Democrats have said the same thing. Sean's Democratic opponent in the treasurer's primary said this. His successor on the Hartford City Council has pointed out the same thing. And quite a number of Democrats in Hartford would agree that Yard Goats Park has been a financial burden for Hartford.
Sure. Thad, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.